So in the previous video, we looked at how classes worked in Python in general. And the reason we did that is so that we can start using those concepts to make operators in Blender. So if you look at operators, there's the edit mode toggle operator, for instance. And if we pull down the header here, you can see that it's right here, bpy.ops.object.edit-mode toggle. So we want to create a very similar operator called bpy.ops.object.rename_selected to wrap around our little rename selected function so that we can call it in the 3D view. And being that this is a beginner's level tutorial, we're just going to get to the point of creating the operator here. And you can use the spacebar search to search for it. You can see I already did it. So like toggle edit mode, you can search for here. So we're just going to make it searchable in the 3D view so you can search for your operator and execute it. We can also assign it to a hotkey after that if you want. So let's look at how we do that with a minimum of fuss. So, so to create an operator like the edit mode toggle, notice when you call it from the from Python here, you notice it's returning this finished back, right? So we want to create something very similar to this that we can call as an operator. Let me do it again so that it's done. And that will help us rename objects in the 3D view. Okay, so let's have a look at what we can do. So let's first start creating our operator by creating a new class. So we're going to do class, and we're going to call this rename selected. And you remember that I mentioned that classes can inherit from other classes. So to make this work as an operator, we have to inherit from the bpy.types.operator. So this is the class of operators in Blender. Now once you've inherited from that type, you have most of the stuff you need for the operator to work already there. However, you do have to change a few things to make it do exactly what you want to do. The first thing you have to change, or you can change, you don't have to do this, is to make a tooltip for it. And that's really easy. If we just do the kind of docstring thing here and type rename selected objects, that's our tooltip. That's done. The next step is to tell Blender what the name of this operator is. And that's done using a special property called BLIDName. So that's just a string, and that's going to be this part of the operator name. The bpy.ops is always going to be there, but everything between that final dot and the parens is the ID name of the operator. And what's really important here is that you have a dot in there. Blender expects that there's one category thing and then a dot and then the actual operator name. So you just have to put that in as a string, and we're just going to stick it in object since it's renaming objects, and we're going to call it rename selected. And so that is the name that Blender knows this operator by. But it needs another name for us to look for it, to search for it with. It needs a label. So this is just the visible label that people are going to read in the UI, and that will be rename selected. Finally, I want to give it some special options. So that's BL options, and we're going to give it sort of, this is actually a set, but we don't need to know that. It's just a collection of items. So we're going to say that it has to have undo, so you're able to undo what you did. And it has to be registered, so it shows up in the redo panel in the UI. Those are some special options. I believe register is on by default, but I'm not 100% sure. So that's some of these things, right, that you need to do. The next thing that we need is that we need to actually have a name that we're going to rename our new items to. Otherwise, it's always going to do the same thing. So let's say it's X, since we just called it X here, or we could just call it new name, right? Doesn't matter, it's a variable. Might as well give it some meaningful information. And this is going to be a property, and it's a special BPY property that we need to use. For anything that shows up in the UI, they have to be of these special BPY properties. So this is going to be bpy.props.string property. They're very similar to like normal strings. They're just specific to Blender's API. And we can say it's got a default equals steer, right? Doesn't matter. And let me make this a bit bigger so we can see better what's going on. So that's going to be the default name that it's going to name everything to. So now that we have this special property for the UI, it's time to add the functionality in. And that is done by defining a function that lives in the class. Notice how we're all indented inside this class. So we're still defining the contents of this class. So we're going to define a new function, and we're going to call that function execute. It has to be called execute, and that's the function that gets called when you actually run the operator. That's what's returning this finished over here. So since we know it returns this finished, we can actually type return finished at the end here. We can expect that that has to happen, but we actually have to give it a couple of extra things here first too. So first we have to give it self, so it's part of the class, and we also have to pass it context. This is something that Blender expects when you're making the execute function for an operator. Otherwise, you're going to get an error. This is just stuff that you have to know. It's part of the API, and if you go to the help menu and click on Python API reference, you can actually look up how operators are defined, and you can find out this stuff. So it's not magic. And you can also look it up from the templates here. For instance, if you look at operator simple, you'll find some of this stuff in the template there. But since we're doing a learning exercise, we'll actually go ahead and do it step by step. So now we have our execute. We need to call our rename selected function. So let's call rename selected. And we're going to get new name, but we want to get new name that belongs to the specific time that we call the operator. So we're going to actually use that self argument here. So self.newName over here. That's how you get these properties getting used inside the operator. Now I'm going to make a small change here. Since we already get context over here, I think I might pass it into this function instead of actually calling bpy.context again. So we're going to add an argument here, like so, and we're going to call it with context here. So if you need context inside your function, you might as well get it from out here. So that's passing through, that's fine. And that's it, right? That should just work. So if we run the script, we won't get any errors, but we won't actually get it working yet. We have one final step to do. Once we've defined this class, we're going to go back to the main level, and we have to tell Blender that it exists. And we have to run a special function. It's in bpy.utils for utilities, and it's register underscore class. So we have to register the class, or Blender won't know about our operator. And we'll just pass it rename selected in here, and then we should have it working. So if I run the script, it doesn't look like anything happened. I did run a script though. So if I do search, Now it shows up in the search menu. If I search for it, rename selected. And if I click on it here, the reason it showed up already because I had already been searching for it before. If you click on it, you'll see that it shows up in the redo panel over here, and it says new name, and that's the name of this property, and it says steer, and we can just click in here and change that name now to happy, for instance, and now we have a bunch of happy steer. So that's basically how you create an operator. So you can actually make a bunch of different operators to do different things. And I'll provide some exercises for different potential operators you can do in the handout for this particular section. One thing to note, other than looking for help in the Python API reference, is that you can start from one of these templates when you're making your own operators. So you don't have to remember every single little bit of boilerplate code that you have to write. So for instance, operator simple is a really handy way to start, and it looks a lot like we just did. It imports BPY. It has a little function that uses context. This one just prints out the objects. It doesn't do anything special. Tooltip, ID name and label. Here's our execute function. Here's our register. The only thing different is this poll function. This poll function has to return either true or false, and basically the operator only works if the answer is true. So this one is looking for there actually being some active object. It won't actually work if there's no object active. So that's like an extra function. There's actually a bunch of different things that the operators can override. We've only barely scratched the surface, but there's a lot of options available in Blender. So I hope you found this entertaining and that you learned something useful, and that it's just the beginning of your journey into using Python in Blender. Bye-bye.